Good morning and welcome. We are in Monday, June 1-7. You'll want to write that down on your login information for your annotations. And of course, we are now beginning week number 3. And as we begin the week, we finish with our work of Red Badge of Courage. The way we will do this is to go back to our reading packet, and we will now be looking at that third element, critical evaluation. So you should have that packet in front of you now, be looking at it now. You need a red ink pen out now. Mr. Drake, do you have your copy of that packet, Red Badge of Courage? You'll need to grab one from the back corner real quickly, okay? Yeah. We will be working now with Miss Laird, who will be reading this packet along with us. This is a little bit more difficult reading than the first 2 sections of the packet. And of course, the assumption is that you've already read the novel. So now we're going to work with, what does the novel mean? Technically, we are looking at level 3A. Now, we are technically looking at level 3A as we work through our packet. Miss Laird, the floor is yours.
Okay, we should be on page 753 of your packets. The Red Badge of Courage, Stephen Crane's second novel. Maggie, a Girl of the Streets, had appeared under a pseudonym in 1893, and his most famous work has often been considered the first truly modern war novel. The war is the American Civil War, and the battle is presumed to be the one fought at Chancellorsville, though neither the war nor the battle is named in the novel. Nor is there mention of Abraham Lincoln or the principal battle generals Joseph Hooker and Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. This is by design, since Crane was writing a different kind of war novel. He was not concerned with the causes of war, the political and social implications of the prolonged and bloody conflict, the strategy and tactics of the commanding officers, or even the real outcome of the battle, in which the combined losses were nearly 30,000 men, including Stonewall Jackson mistakenly shot in the darkness by one of his own men. So for this first paragraph, what did we find that was significant about this novel? It was a different kind of war novel. Why was it different? They listed off a bunch of reasons. Right. So jot down a couple of those reasons. Why was it a different kind of war novel? Another thing that was significant about this is that it was considered the first truly modern war novel. You're just going to be doing notes for each paragraph. That's all you need to worry about. Mm-hmm. Yep. Basically, we're going to review the information from each paragraph and then go through it. From beginning to end, the short novel focuses upon one Union Army volunteer. Though other characters enter the story and appear intermittently, they are distinctly minor, and they are present primarily to show the relationship of Henry Fleming, usually called the Youth, to one person, to a small group of soldiers, or to the complex war of which he is such an insignificant part. So what did this tell us about Henry?
He's not really important.
Is that what it said?
In terms of the war.
In terms of the war, he was insignificant.
But
in the novel, it's
character.
Primarily all him.
Yeah.
Some characters come in and out. What was another thing that we noticed about the characters in this book? Did Crane ever refer to them by name?
A couple times.
Yeah, a few times.
If people were talking to him or about him, they referred to him as Henry. But what did the author usually called him
soldier, the tall
the youth.
soldier.
Okay, so go ahead and write those things down. Much of the story takes the reader into Henry's consciousness. We share his boyish dreams of glory, his excitement in anticipating battle action, his fear of showing fear, his cowardice in flight, his inner justification of what he has done, his wish for a wound to symbolize a courage he has not shown, the ironic gaining of his false red badge, his secret knowledge of the badge's origin, his earning the badge as he later fights fiercely and instinctively, his joy in musing on his own bravery and valiant actions, his anger at an officer who fails to appreciate his soldiery, and his final feeling that the great death is, after all, not a thing to be feared so much. Now he tells himself he is a man, in centering the story within the consciousness of an inexperienced youth caught in a war situation whose meaning and complexities he cannot understand. Crane anticipates Ford Madox Ford, Ernest Hemingway, and other later novels. So the point of view of this book comes from Henry, and it's how did they mention what was it considered? We're in Henry's head, so it's his stream of what?
Thoughts.
His stream of thoughts, his stream of consciousness. We're with Henry all the time. We're in his head. We see his metamorphosis. You might want to jot down where he began and how he ended up. Bless you. Kazuna. So it was a war novel, but it wasn't really about the war. Because did Henry understand anything about this war?
He understood that he had to kill people.
He understood that, but he didn't understand what was behind it. Did he ever really question it?
Not really.
Mm-mm.
He was a cow.
He was a cow. Crane has been called a realist, a naturalist, an impressionist, and a symbolist. He is all of these in The Red Badge of Courage. Though young Stephen Crane had never seen battle when he wrote the novel, he had read about the experience of war. He had talked with veterans and had studied history under a Civil War general. And he had imagined what it would be like to be frightened young man facing violent death amid the confusion, noise, and turmoil of a conflict which had no clear meaning to him. Intuitively, he wrote so realistically that several early reviewers concluded that only an experienced soldier could have written the book. After Crane had later seen the Greeks and Turks fighting in 1897, he was a journalist reporting the war. He told Joseph Conrad, "My picture of war was all right. I have found it as I imagined it." So what's significant about the author writing this book?
He's been war.
He what?
He knows what the war's about.
He had never fought in the war, but he wrote it so well that everyone thought that he had to have fought in the war.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
It's what like every writer tries to do when they're writing movies.
Some write from experience.
Yeah, but if they have through experience, they're trying to make people think.
He ended up going and witnessing war and reporting on it. Was it how he had written about it earlier before he had actually firsthand seen it?
According to him, it was.
Yeah.
The picture of war was alright. I found it as I imagined it.
Mm-hmm. Although naturalistic passages appear in the novel, Crane portrays in Henry Fleming not a helpless chip floating on an indifferent ocean of life, but a youth sometimes impelled into action by society or by instinct, yet also capable of consciously willing acts. Before the first skirmish, Henry wishes he could escape from his regiment and considers his plight. There were iron laws of tradition and law on four sides. He was in a moving box. In the second skirmish, he was a moving box. He runs like a rabbit when a squirrel in the forest flees after Henry throws a pine cone at him. Henry justifies his own flight. There was the law, he said. Nature had given him a sign. But he is not content to look upon himself as on the squirrel's level. He feels guilt over his cowardice. When he carries the flag in the later skirmishes, he is not a terrified chicken or rabbit or squirrel, but a young man motivated by pride, by a sense of belonging to a group, and by a determination to show his courage to an officer who has scornfully called the soldiers in his group a lot of mule drivers. So nature, where did nature play the biggest part?
When he got back on the boat.
When he ran. That's when he was observing it. And what did he observe in nature? What was he comparing himself to at first?
The squirrel.
Well, he was comparing himself to animals that ran. He observed a squirrel being chased. Mm-hmm. If you want to write that down, you're more than welcome to. You guys can add your own thoughts and questions into these notes by all means. At the end of the book, Henry was no longer a chicken, a rabbit, a squirrel. What was he? Just write down a few things describing how he had changed by the end of the book. From the beginning, critics have both admired and complained about Crane's impressionistic writing and his use of imagery and symbols in The Red Badge of Courage. Edward Garnett, in 1898, called Crane the thief impressionist of our day and praised his wonderful fervor and freshness of style. Joseph Conrad, himself an impressionist, was struck by Crane's genuine verbal felicity, welding analysis and description in a continuous fascination of individual style. And Conrad saw Henry as the symbol of all untried men. By contrast, one American critic in 1898 described the novel as a mere riot of words and condemned the violent straining after effect and the absurd similes. Though H.G. Wells liked the book as a whole, he commented on those dramatic splashes that at times deafen and confuse in The Red Badge, those images that astonish rather than enlighten. So they've mentioned the opinions of two very well-known authors, Joseph Conrad, H.G. Wells. Are any of you guys familiar with their writings? You've heard of The Time Machine by H.G. Wells, 1984?
I'm actually quite familiar with H.G. Wells.
Joseph Conrad, Heart of Darkness. Might want to jot those titles down, and when you get a chance, look up who these guys are. Why would their opinions be significant to the writing of Red Badge? Because they're what?
Because they're good writers.
They are.
Well, H.G. Wells was more of a science fiction writer, so
Mm-hmm.
his thoughts in historical fiction are kind of away from what he does.
Sure. And then you, next to the names of these authors, Joseph Conrad and H.G. Wells, you might want to write down a few of the things they said in the paragraph about Crane's work. Impressionistic writing. Yet, judging by the continuing popularity of the Red Badge of Courage, most readers are not repelled by Crane's repeated use of color. Blue demonstration, red eyes, red animal, war, red sun, or by his use of images, dark shadows that moved like monsters. The dragons were coming, guns that belched and howled like brass devils guarding a gate. Only in a few passages does Crane indulge in arty writing. The guns squatted in a row like savage chiefs. They argued with abrupt violence, or drop into the pathetic fallacy. The flag suddenly sank down as if dying. Its motion as it fell was a gesture of despair. Usually the impressionistic phrasing is appropriate to the scene or to the emotional state of Henry Fleming in particular moment. As when after he fought, he believes heroically, the sun shines now bright and gay in the blue enameled sky. So they're elaborating a little bit more specifically on the type of impressionistic writing Crane was using in this book. In your own words, describe what he was doing.
He was writing a book.
You might write down one of those examples that they gave you. A brilliant work of the imagination, The Red Badge of Courage will endure as what Crane afterward wrote a friend he had intended it to be, a psychological portrayal of fear. My recommendation for that is, what did he intend for this book to be? That last phrase, that last sentence in quotes, pretty much sums it up.
Psychological portrayal of fear.
Okay.
We began our time together 3 weeks ago by pointing out in a lecture that we're always playing the game of understanding this thing called plot. Remember? We defined plot as what? Do you remember what we called it? It's kind of the what? How would you say it? What is plot? It's kind of like the storyline, isn't it? Yeah, it's kind of like the map of the story, isn't it? And you'll remember that we did that thing where we put like a little hill where you have a beginning, you have an identifiable middle, you have an identifiable end. Do that real quickly on your paper. Draw your little plot hill, and then same one. And then identify real quickly what in your estimation is the primary conflict. Remember that rising action was a part of that conflict. What do you consider as the primary conflict of this novel, Red Badge of Courage? What do you constitute as the climax? So jot down those two things real quickly as part of your plot hill. What do you constitute as the climax of the story? The moment in which the conflict comes to its fruition or its end. What do you constitute in this story as being the climax of the story for you? What kind of conflict do you qualify it as? Internal or external predominantly? And let's point out, well-written pieces of literature can have any number of potential conflicts. A lot of this, Mr. Bolts, comes down to which one you want to concentrate on, we could probably say it that way. Which one you want to focus on. What do you think? Is it more of an internal conflict, or is it more of an external conflict? Internal conflict where the character is challenged with thoughts inside his or her head. External conflict, character versus another character. Character versus nature. Character versus the group or society. I've had Miss Williams students who point out all 4 of those kinds of conflicts. Character versus self, character versus another character, character versus nature or an opposable force, character versus society or an idea. All 4 of those types of conflict are present in this little novella, which is quite remarkable if you'll think about it. Crane has written what is really just a short story. It's hardly worthy to call it a novel. I mean, it's not very long, is it? And yet, in this novella, he's able to accomplish all 4 kinds of conflicts. Let's jot down real quickly, character versus self. Do you have an example of that you can jot down real quickly? What's the most obvious example of character versus self? Yeah, the kid's overcoming his own fear, isn't he? Will I run? Will I not run? I'm not going to run. Crap, I'm running. Oh, I get hit in the head. Now everyone thinks I got shot in the head. Everyone thinks I'm a hero. I'm no hero. I'm a complete loser. Why can't I be stronger? Why can't I be more courageous? He will watch several of his pals go through terrible passing and death. And ultimately he finds his red badge of courage. What about character versus character? Do we have that kind of conflict in this novel? Jot down one example of character versus character conflict. What's the most obvious example of this, do you think? Which one do you like the best on that count?
The 2 fighting.
You do, don't you? You have several verbal altercations, don't you? Where guys are going back and forth at each other. A lot of it has to do with calling on your manhood, right? And notice how guys a lot of times fight. Have you noticed this? Rarely. Have you noticed this, Mr. Winlock? Rarely when guys get ready to fight, do they ever just walk up to each other and start doing this. Have you noticed that? How do guys normally start fighting? What's the first? Did you just talk? All right, let's go. Right? Then there's the swelling of the chest, the raising of the chin, the mean-looking, ferocious eyes, stepping into the space. No contact's been made yet, though. Right? Right? Of course, a lot of this depends on where we are. If we're on school grounds, they're where cameras are watching. So it's a whole lot better if the other guy hits you first, and that way you can jack him and say, hey, he hit me first. But guys have this tendency to start talking before they start hitting. By the way, the Iliad opens, the great song of war in the Greek tradition, opens not with physical fighting, but actually with linguistic fighting. 2 guys are arguing back and forth. How about character versus nature, or an imposable will of some kind? A force which does not seem to be able to somehow get beyond. The character can't seem to get around or beyond it. What's that one? Running. In regards to why does the kid run? What is it that makes him run? Yeah, there's these issues of the animals themselves, right? Nature itself is personified. Of course, if you'll think about it, war itself becomes a monster from which he cannot escape. Even if he can escape it in his body, he cannot escape it in his what? He's constantly stuck in the war, right? And of course, some of us have spent time thinking a little bit in our junior year about the fact that when soldiers go off to war, John Steinbeck wrote a really famous piece on this, when they come back, they're still in the war, aren't they? They never can escape that experience. How about character versus society, the group or an idea? What is the classic example here you want to say? What would be that one? Character versus society or an idea. Which one do you want to write down for that one? What do you think? The very war itself, and more particularly about the war, what? Right. He's in a group, isn't he? Notice the novel begins with the young man in a group bivouacked with other soldiers. What are they debating? What are they debating at the beginning of the novel? Whether they're going to go to fight or not. Some of them are like really excited. Yay, let's go fight. Others of them, the older ones, are like, dude, we're totally fine to just sit here. Why are the older ones the ones that say, dude, we're totally fine? Why? What do they know that the young kids don't know? You got it. They've been in the middle of those battles. And they're like, hey, we could sit here forever. That will just be fine. As opposed to the young kids are like, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go, gotta go. Let's go kill something. Yay, this will be fun. By the end of the novel, they're walking where? Where are they walking at the end of the novel?
Another battle.
They're not going home, are they? Yay, let's all go home. The war is over. No. The novel ends where it begins, waiting for the next contest, waiting for the next fighting. Crane making some powerful observations about battle, war, and the way it affects people's minds, right? Now, we have read the novel. After we read plot summary, we've now evaluated the novel at level 2A especially, talking about major themes, messages. What we do now is go to a 3A observation. We're going to compare text to text. The novel we read versus the film we will watch. We're going to watch a film presentation of this novel. I'm sorry, Mr. Drake, observation.
For character versus character, like what was...
Character versus character, we can easily talk about when he and other characters in the novel, especially linguistically or verbally, go at each other, huh?
Like Wilson.
There you go, classic example. Excellent, excellent. Now we're going to turn and watch a film version of this novel. Now this is an older film version. Interestingly, not a lot of films have been made of Red Badge of Courage. This is the classic older black and white version. Now the reason why we're watching this film is to see how a filmmaker interprets the novel. Because it's an older film, you're not going to see really violent war scenes. See, you guys have been raised with a different kind of film when war is portrayed. You've seen guys getting jacked and blood and all of that, and you play, of course, video games with lots of that. Earlier films couldn't do that, or they would not be allowed to be shown in the theater. Got me? So what they had to do was to create the fears of war without a lot of the actual physical representation of war. It's interesting to watch this film to see how exactly that gets done. Let's now turn to it.